Well, hello and welcome today for our Gateway Leadership Institute webinar. It's our third installment in this series, and we're just going to take a few minutes and allow all of our registered attendees to join the webinar before we jump into everything today. So thank you so much for joining. We're looking forward to today's session. As you can see on the screen, all of the panelists who are going to be joining us today. The webinar today is Careering Through Times of Change. It's part of our larger Institute series focused on reimagining international higher education careers. Not only has a lot changed in the past half century or more, but even in the most recent years, the impact of the pandemic and just the nature of geopolitical forces, what it means to have a career in international education has changed, but we're going to learn today that there are many different paths to a career in leadership in international higher education. There are also many different institutes or organizations that provide a wealth of resources for people just entering this career or sustaining where they're at or wanting to aspire to new and higher things professionally. So we're still going to give it just another moment or two before we dive in. But thank you so much for joining us today. As you are joining, please feel free to use the chat feature and let everybody know where you are joining us from. Let us know your institution or your organization, where you are around the world. We're always happy to see those conversations inside the chat box. Also, during today's webinar, if you have a question that you'd like one of the panelists to address, please use the Zoom Q&A feature. We will continue to monitor the chat box for any of those questions, but it does simplify our process. Today's presentation will include a discussion or presentation from each of the panelists, and then we reserved time at the end for a Q&A for everybody at the same time. Okay, so I see Monterey, California already chiming in, Oklahoma, Denver, so great. Of course, I'm based in Denver, so happy to have any of my neighbors join. But it does look like we have a good crowd with us now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And thank you so much for joining us today. This is part of the Gateway International Group's Leadership Institute program, all focused on reimagining careers in international higher education. And today's session is focused on careering through times of change. Within Gateway International, we do offer a variety of services for institutes and organizations around the world. So we have our solutions, we have learning abroad, a variety of resources. Today's focus is going to be on our panelists and our experts in the field, but please take some time to visit the Gateway website if you haven't already, or subscribe to the Gateway Edge newsletter. I'm thrilled to be with you today as one of your facilitators, one of the co-facilitators. Day to day, I work with M Square Media, but I'm thrilled to be an affiliate with Gateway International. And I'll let my colleague Rosa do a brief introduction of herself.
Hello, my name is Rosa Almoguera, and I'm joining you from Toledo, Spain. Very glad to be here with our great panelists tonight. And with that, I want to introduce our intern, Seemingly, if you want to.
Hi, everyone. My name is Seemingly. I'm the Gateway intern this fall. I'm very happy to be here with everyone. Yeah, nice to meet you.
And we are thrilled to have Jiming as part of our internship program. She joins us from the University of Pittsburgh, where they have an excellent program in international higher education. Rosa, do you want to take a moment to thank our participating organizations?
Yes, we are able to make this webinar possible thanks to our participating organizations, which are Terra Dota, the Pi News, and Upgrad Abroad. Thank you to all of them. We also want to thank our sponsoring organizations, which are Verify Ed, Shorelight, Stylus, On Point Global Strategies, and I See a Way.
Thank you so much, Rosa. We do like to highlight that all the participants in our Gateway Leadership Institute, which is a dedicated cohort that happens parallel to the webinar series with workshops and other activities, they're also going to be receiving digital badges acknowledging all of the different skill sets they have developed while being part of the Institute, and those come through Verify Ed. They're also receiving a discount code from Stylus Publications so that they can access all of the great literature and work done by leaders in our field. Now, we really want to get into the substance of today's presentation. We have an all-star panel to speak with you today. We are going to be joined today by Darla Deerdorf with AIEA. We have David Fleschler, who's the Vice Provost of International Affairs at Case Western Reserve University. Jeet Joshi is the Associate Vice President of International Education and Global Engagement at CSU Long Beach. And then Jerry is also joining us. He's the Vice President of University Partnerships at USA, or for the USA from UpGrad Abroad. Each of them is going to have about 8 minutes or so to share some valuable insights from their perspective. And then we're going to have a dedicated Q&A period where we can go a little bit deeper into the topics they discuss and really take time to address some of the questions you have about your own career journey. So as I mentioned before, please introduce yourself in the chat box, but any questions you have, please use the Zoom Q&A feature, and that will help us sort through those questions and get as many answered as possible at the end of the session today. So without further ado, we're going to start with our Executive Director of AIEA, one of the leading organizations in international education. And I'm going to pull up her slides and we're going to go ahead and get started.
Thanks so very much, George, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today for this webinar. So we'd like to start with sharing with you about the Association of International Education Administrators and go into more detail. As you know, AIEA is one of several international education associations in the US and around the world. And AIEA is the only association specifically focused on international education leadership. And so I'm very pleased to share with you more details about the association. Before I do, on the next slide, I want to make sure we acknowledge that the AIEA Secretariat is located on the ancestral lands of the Shakori, Okanichi, and Catawba peoples. And we want to honor with gratitude the land itself and those who have stewarded it through the generations. And we understand that this really calls us into a commitment to continue to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit. And in addition, we do want to acknowledge the overlapping histories on this land, including past violence and ongoing harm produced by the legacy of racialized slavery and oppression. So I want to start with issuing two invitations. To start first to invite all of you to come to our 2023 AIEA Annual Conference, which will be in Washington, DC. You see the dates there, February 19 through 22. And the registration is actually going live this week. So you can go to the AIEA website and register for this conference, chaired by our immediate past president, who is joining us today, none other than David Fleschler. So David has been, and the conference committee has been working diligently to plan a very rigorous and insightful conference for all participants. And so we certainly invite you all to be part of that conference. The second invitation I want to invite you to is to join and apply for the 2023 AIEA Leadership Academy. AIEA is pleased to offer a week-long Leadership Academy for those who are new to their senior international officer position at higher education institutions. And this is held in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. You'll see the dates there as being May 1 through 5. The faculty are leaders in the field, including past AIEA presidents. The faculty for the 2023 conference, and you'll see on the next slide some more details, will be Harvey Charles, Cheryl Matherly, and David D. Maria. And so we're really pleased to be able to have those faculty leading participants throughout that week-long experience. And we encourage all of you who are interested to apply by the November 15th early application deadline, although you would have up until March 1 to apply for that. I also wanted to share with you a key resource that has just been published, and we launched this publication at the conference of AIEA this past February in New Orleans. And that is the second edition of this very large volume of the Handbook of International Higher Education that was co-edited by myself and Hans DeWitt, Betty Lisk, and Harvey Charles, and really contains quite a bit of substantive information needed by senior international officers and leaders in the field of international education. I should also mention that 2022 is the year that we are celebrating AIA's 40th anniversary. So we're really excited to have been able to celebrate the 40th anniversary with the launch of this second edition of the handbook. So that's some key resources I just wanted to mention up front and invitations. Here is a recap of some of the dates for you to be aware of coming up. As I mentioned, the November 15th deadline to apply for the early application for the week-long Leadership Academy, with March 1 being the regular deadline. Also, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, we have a Presidential Fellows program that is quite selective and renowned, and that deadline is May 1. And then a May 15th thematic forum deadline, which I'll speak more about in just a moment. And then looking farther afield, August 15th of 2023 being the deadline for the next conference proposal deadline. So those are some deadlines to keep in mind. Now, wanted to just share with you a bit more about AIEA and go into and letting you know kind of what's available and what you can expect if you're a member of the association. So as I mentioned, this is the only association dedicated exclusively to senior level leaders in the field of international education. And on the next slide, you will see our current leadership team. And two of those faces will look very familiar because they're joining us today, but I'm very pleased that our current president is Jewel Wynn. She is our first female African-American president of the association. She is the SIO and the Chief Diversity Officer at Tennessee State University, an HBCU. And then you see that David is our immediate past president, and our incoming president-elect is Jeet Joshi. So really glad to have both of them joining us today. And then you see some of the other leadership there as making up the executive committee of the association. Now, a word on the next slide about the senior international officer. AIA does use this term to signify any of those who have that senior level position within higher education institutions. So we tend to use the term senior international officer, SIO, but we also recognize that there are many other titles, particularly if leaders are not based in the United States. We know that, for example, in Canada, we often hear about the International Liaison Officer. In Europe, it might be International Relations Manager. There are many other titles that are given for those who hold these positions, and there can be more than one SIO at an institution. And also there can be perhaps a vice rector or some other designation of a person who has the responsibilities of internationalizing their institution while doing many other responsibilities as well. So we recognize that the context matters, and it really varies around the world and by institution. Typically, senior international officers are those who have been tasked with internationalizing their institution. So they're engaged more at the strategic level in internationalizing their institution and can have any number of responsibilities. You see the list here on the slide in terms of whether it's partnerships, education abroad, internationalizing the curriculum, research. It can be many different areas of responsibility. Recruitment is another one that we often find. And all of this is AIA collects every 3 years through what is called an AIA SIO profile survey. And so we collect quite a bit of data around who these leaders are, what their responsibilities are, and we share that information with our membership. So that gives you a little bit of a snapshot about the senior international officer and the SIO, as we like to say within AIA. Now, one of the key resources that AIA has that I want to bring to your attention is AIA Standards of Professional Practice for International Education Leaders. And this includes 22 standards in 4 different areas. And Jeet Joshi was actually one of the leaders who worked quite a bit on developing these along with other colleagues. And on the next slide, I just will show you briefly what some of these standards look like under internationalization expertise and under leadership management. You'll see different standards listed, and I'll give you a moment to kind of skim through that. But these are really considered to be absolutely essential for those leaders who are wanting to internationalize their institutions. On the next slide, you'll see the last two areas, which include advocacy and personal effectiveness. Personal effectiveness including entrepreneurship, as well as intercultural skills, among others. So these are the 22 standards that AIA likes to uphold for its leaders. Now, some of the areas where we work is around networking and community. It really is the home for those who lead conference internationalization, and you see some of the resources there, including our conference and some virtual networking events that we have. On the next slide, you will see professional development opportunities, including regular town halls that started with the pandemic. We also have the mentorship programs, as I mentioned, particularly the Presidential Fellows mentoring program, but also other programs. And then we have the Leadership Academy, as well as a newly launched the Advanced Leadership Academy, which we just held a few weeks ago for those who are more seasoned international leaders at campuses. Also, a number of resources are available. I showed you the handbook, the second edition of the handbook, but then we also have various resources on the AIA website, including white papers and briefing papers. We provide members access to the Journal of Studies in International Education, which is the leading journal in our field, as well as a number of other resources available to members on the website. We also, on the next slide, you'll see some resources around advocacy. We do have a leadership committee around advocacy and public policy, and you'll see a number of resources on the AIA website around advocacy of international education as well. And then finally, on the next slide, you'll see ways that members can get involved in the leadership of AIA, as well as contributing to the field as a whole. And certainly welcome your membership in AIEA, and as well as your engagement and leadership. And I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have as we continue, and really glad to be joined again by two of the current AIA leaders, David and Jeet. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Darla. That was, essential, because for those who've been with our webinar series through all three installments, we've heard from NAFSA, and we've talked with the Pi News and TISUP and AirScene, many of the great professional organizations. But now, as we're also talking about that career development investment, and where do they get this knowledge, and where should they be looking to for some real leadership in these areas, AIEA really needs to be celebrated, and some special time dedicated to that. So thank you. Now, in the chat box, we have some people talking about whether they're current members or what that all looks like. So, if you're not a current member of AIA, I certainly encourage, if it's not you, or if you think it's not the right fit for you right now, still make sure your organization is, and then also look for ways that you can do it yourself. Along the way in my own career, when my office or the university I was a part of did not have the resources to do for professional development for a membership, I have made that investment myself. And I do think that is at times something we need to do, and AIA is such an important place for that. So thank you, Darla. And of course, we want to progress in our discussion today and hear next from David Fleschler with Case Western Reserve University, talking a little bit about his experience professionally to get where he is today. So David, are you there?
I'm here, George.
Okay. I have your slide, but I'm going to take down the slide so those of us, so we can see you as you are speaking.
Okay, we'll try to do that. So first of all, Darla, that was terrific. I endorse what both George and Darla have said, that AIEA is really quite a important organization for those who are part of the international higher education field in general, and particularly for leadership. And I think any of us would be happy to talk about AIEA with anybody who's on the webinar. So this session, the title was Reimagining International Higher Education Careers. And one of the ways that it was described was a shift of the profession from a generalist model to one that requires specialization. I'm not sure that I completely agree that there's a complete shift in that, and I'll talk through this a little bit, but I would agree that the special pieces of all of our offices on business, on risk, on health issues, those are growing and those are becoming more and more important, and happy to talk about some of that as we get to a question and answer. So what I'd like to do with George, you and others' permission, is briefly take you through my own career path. Not so much because anybody should follow it. In fact, I'm not sure I would encourage anybody to follow my career path, but it gives you a sense that bringing a diverse background into international higher education can actually be something that is remarkably helpful and I think important in the job of senior international officer and in international higher education in general. So I'm gonna go through that very quickly, and then I'm gonna highlight areas in my past that I think have been helpful in the current job, and then obviously happy to have more conversation in our discussion. So I'd start out with motivation or passion. I think that most of us in this field have a sense that what we're doing is more than just coming into work every day, but it's really about helping students, helping faculty members, advancing research in ways that are important for individual students, faculty members, research, et cetera, but ultimately is important and impacts the world. And I felt like I started thinking about the world when I was a very young boy. My mother was English. I went to visit our relatives when I was 18 months old. And I think throughout my growing up, the idea that we're not just a people unto ourselves, but we're part of a much broader world was something that I became passionate about, and ultimately that has led to my career choice. So I started actually as a lawyer. I went to law school. I graduated from law school and worked at a law firm for about 5 years, in doing much in international law, as well as other sort of corporate tax, et cetera. But it became clear to me that being a big firm lawyer was not what I wanted to do with my career. So I transitioned, and I won't go into all the reasons for this, we don't have time, but I transitioned to work at the airport, and the authority that runs the airport here in Cleveland. I was the number 2 person, and oversaw a big group of people in finance, administration, marketing, government, et cetera. But then, for a variety of reasons, went on to run a political campaign of ultimately a man who became a member of Congress and went on to become his chief of staff in Washington. We unfortunately then lost, and I ran my own consulting business, really an entrepreneurial business, doing legal work and government relations consulting. And then again, I won't go through all the reasons for this, but then went to a nonprofit community organization, the Jewish Federation here in Cleveland, and headed all of their international work. And then, because Case Western Reserve had gone through a strategic planning process and internationalization became a focus of the university, I was hired about a dozen years ago as the inaugural senior international officer here at Case Western Reserve. So I take you through that to say that my career path is actually quite different, I think, than many people who go through the academic side of higher education and become a senior international officer. I just like to draw a few of the areas, the skills out of that background that literally help me every day in what I'm doing today. So the law background, I review contracts. I'm involved in negotiations. We're trying to figure out how to move the office forward in ways that having a legal background is hugely helpful. Politics and government, what you heard from Darla is that part of what an SIO has to do is do outreach, be in touch with our members of Congress, be in touch with our government relations office within the university to be talking about the importance of international higher education and how you move people to help them understand that importance. When I ran my own consulting firm, in essence, as an SIO, you are a little bit of an entrepreneur yourself. You're building up an office. You're trying to make sure that others within the university understand the importance of what you're doing. And so that becomes hugely helpful. And then at the Federation, I worked with a rather large organization that was community-based and had to learn how to create consensus among literally hundreds of people in a community. And if there's one thing that any of us in higher education know, it's that you can't move forward unless you have some kind of consensus. There's no such thing as winning 50% plus one and then moving forward. That rips the university apart. You have to build a process and build consensus. And so from all of these various positions that I had, I feel now like I have brought in a background which has been hugely important to what I do now. So I conclude by saying there are many paths that SIOs take and that people in higher education take to get where they're going. I would think for all of you who are listening here, think about the skills, the understanding, the broad sort of thoughts that you need to bring into your position as you move forward. And then I'll look forward to the question and discussion period afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I think, part of what I think people are, hopefully we're tying together is that while there are some prescribed paths out there that make sense, as there is so much in life, those best laid plans do not always work out the way we want. And being agile, I know in my own career experience, things that I thought were a real setback ended up being the opportunity that opened other doors. And it's hard to see that in the moment, but in hearing your story and the different paths you've taken, at least I recognize that is one of those lessons. But we're going to come back to that through the Q&A. Next, we were going to hear, and so thank you so much, David. Next, we're going to be hearing from Jeet Joshi. He's the Associate Vice President of International Education and Global Engagement. Jeet is a true leader in our field. I had the privilege of working with him closely in AIRC, and really excited to open the panel for him to share a little bit about his career journey. So Jeet, are you available? Are you there?
I am here.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to do the same thing and drop the slide so we can see you, and thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, David. Thank you, George and Darla, for a very insightful commentary on the topic that we're talking today. Well, as David was talking about his career trajectory and what he did before and how he ended up being an SIO at Case Western, I will start by saying that I don't think any of us went to college thinking that we would become an SIO. That's not, really the first in mind, at least when I went to college. I wasn't thinking about being an SIO at a university. although, my own background, my academic background does come from international higher education. I did my doctorate at UMass Amherst in comparative international education. But, I think SIO positions, as I know so many of them, and in the panel, two of us are SIOs, and Darla and Jerry, although Jerry might have had that position before. We are generalists in many ways. I consider myself as a generalist. Thinking too many things, too many, areas when it comes to internationalization of the university, whether it is the administration, whether it is the curriculum, whether it is, study abroad or other, faculty research partnerships and all that. We think in many different ways. And, that's why I kind of see myself as a generalist, working with all disciplines in the university, all college deans, all college, department chairs and faculty, coming to, talk about the internationalization aspect of their discipline, their department, their schools and colleges. So I view the SIO position from that angle as a generalist in higher education. And as to myself, before working at the university, I actually, until recently, had kind of two different divisions. As David talked about, international educators needing to be a little bit more entrepreneurial. I was dean of continuing higher education at Cal State Long Beach and other institutions, including UConn and San Bernardino until recently. So I was also the SIO for the last more than a decade at Cal State Long Beach. So I was leading both of those. Both had elements of being a generalist and being, able to work with all different constituents within the university. But I always had the international background before coming to the university, positions. I worked with institutions like the, US Peace Corps, UNESCO, UNICEF, and other UN organizations. So I always had that international background, in me, even though I was at times just doing continuing higher education. So I always had the international aspect embedded into even in the continuing, education programs. In many ways, some of the continuing education programs are sort of the continuing education for international audience. That's how, I viewed it and, did programs, in that. A lot of our partnerships could have that kind of an element. The topic itself today about the career and reimagination of how the field and how the position is coming to be. I do agree with David that I don't think it's a complete turnaround, that we need to reimagine everything, but there are elements increasingly that we need to think about. I myself, in the position at Cal State Long Beach, I oversee a very centralized operation from an administrative perspective, including recruitment and admission of international students, and certainly all the other aspects of international scholar and student services, where also the immigration and visa services for the entire university resides, not only for international students but for faculty, hires, personnel, areas, as well, and certainly the education abroad and other internationally affiliated program. But in the meantime, I kind of see my operation academically decentralized to some extent, because there are many elements of international education that resides in individual colleges and departments. Certainly the degree itself, international studies and others, need to be in an academic college, academic department, but also, other centers, international business centers, some of the language, centers, some of the area specific, like the India Studies Center at our university, are housed in colleges. So although they all work, with my office in one way or the other, and I serve in their advisory boards in many of those. They are housed in the academic, side of the operation. But in the meantime, when you are administratively centralized, you do get engaged with all of them for their needs when they begin to develop the program. But the SIO position itself, I think increasingly, I find myself at least, thinking more about the risk management as things have changed quite a bit, globally. I do get involved in, I need to tend to a lot of, concerns and issues that happens in any part of the world that might be. So risk management is an area that SIOs aren't necessarily trained for, but in the meantime are responsible for. And I kind of see that it's an area that AIA or other organizations, NASA and such, are focusing, and we will all need to refocus more, on that area. And also the area of mental health, certainly coming out of the pandemic, it has heightened some of the needs to pay attention to that area. But it is an area that none of us are experts. Some of us may be coming from that kind of a background, but most of us are not. But it is an area that SIOs are involved, more and more. So, these are some of the areas that I think the SIO positions are evolving into and, needing to pay attention to. Certainly, the president, provost do get concerned about some of these things. And then the SIO becomes the, at times, the lead person to address some of these things. Although, in the health areas, you certainly would want to go with the health, experts, because that's not what you know a lot about. But also I think as international policies are changing, what I mean by that is the policies around GDPR and policies around the similar policy in China has developed, and the partnership and the contract negotiations and all that is becoming more complex. I can think just 5 to 10 years ago, it didn't used to be, that complicated. Institutions have their own stringent, rules and regulations, and certainly the European Union has come up with this GDPR policy. And I kind of think that the SIO positions need to be much more familiar in the contracting and, agreement, side of international, higher education. But then, I look at it internally also. David talked about advocacy a little bit. Certainly, there's an external advocacy that's needed, not only in the US, but globally in many countries. The need for advocacy at times, I feel in my position is also internal to your organization. Although nobody in your university would disagree with you about the importance and need for global education, needing to have our students, come out with a degree with some global understanding. No one would disagree that. But international education at times is not on the top of the agenda when it comes to the institutional priority. We need to be cognizant of that fact. Sometimes not even top 10, in the priority list. And how do you advocate, the importance of higher education as an SIO to the deans, to the department chairs? I think largely faculty agree with it, but within the administration, whether it is for funding, whether it is for, more focus on curricular side or, things like that, I think the internal advocacy is also very important within your own, institutions. SIOs take a leading role in all aspects of international affairs. And as our institutions engage in the comprehensive campus internationalization efforts, I think the advocacy internally becomes increasingly important, because not everyone understands it, or even if they understand it, they have competing priorities. But you as an SIO, that's your priority, and you continue to advocate for that. I'll leave at that, George. Maybe I ran over time, but I would look forward to any Q&A and other conversation here.
No, really, really appreciate your perspective and where you're coming from, because over the course of this institute, our participants, and even from previous webinars, have talked about, while there is this generalist position that an SIO needs to be a lot of things to a lot of people, the demands are now developing for new staff positions that really can do duty of care and international health, safety, and security, that global finance and marketing. This expertise, I think, is helping to bring a focus that this really is a professional space. It's not something that anybody can just be dropped into. And not saying that anybody says that, but sometimes in universities, people get shuffled around in a way that they're not being positioned for success. Okay, so thank you so much, Jeet. Really appreciate your perspective. Next, we are going to be hearing from Upgrad Abroad. Jerry's the vice president there of university partnerships in the United States. Jerry, are you there with us?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone from lovely Delhi, India. Hope you're all well. What I'm going to kind of touch on actually is probably more nuts and bolts, and really looking at sort of administrative and international study abroad type organizational structures. And Jeet kind of touched there on the centralized impacts and some of the centralized things that he's doing at his institution. And from my experience, I've been at several institutions where we moved from a decentralized to a centralized, and the impact that had at the campus, both positive and negative. So I just wanted to kind of touch on some of those points. But then also, after my 20 years of working at institutions, I'm now working at a private company, a U.S. Upgrad Abroad, and then from our side, how that impacts us and what we see from our aspect as well, for SIOs to keep in mind, and how it impacts externally rather than just internally. Jeet touched on some advocacy internally. I've been advocating a lot from an external organization into institutions on how they can help us and their international enrollment and success a little bit better. So agenda, the 4 points there, but I'm going to keep this brief. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but if you want to go on to the next slide there. So talking a little bit about centralized, a centralized sort of shop, which Jeet talked a little bit about there, is a one-stop shop. They have admissions, marketing, partnerships, recruitment, student services. And what was touched on as well is you're seeing a lot more things around or operations around, mental health and accommodation, living, those kinds of things as well. I know in the previous institution I worked for, we were getting very involved in rentals, just trying to help students find places to live. And I think we don't really think about that as a mental health, but we had students showing up without housing, and that really created a lot of mental impacts for those students to be able to be successful in their study. So a lot of things kind of being wrapped into one in a centralized office. A centralized office can create more streamlined, more efficient processes and logistics for the institution as a whole. I think G kind of mentioned there that an SIO is more involved in all these things and can advocate a little better because they're more aware of all of the surroundings around international, rather than just specifically admissions or just specifically mental health or marketing or partnerships and finances and those kinds of things as well. So I've always had or tried to change to centralized operations, and we've had a lot of success with my staff being able to have a full encompassing view of international students and how things impact them on campus, as well as after they finish their studies and those kinds of things as well. A centralized office, though, can create some barriers. So cross-trained staff is great, but you sometimes have a lack of experts. So everybody knows a little bit of everything, but where is that expert? And that is one area that I found when I was in some centralized offices, is we all knew a lot, but we didn't. There wasn't one person that knew everything on admissions, or everything on the health side, or whatever it might be. We all kind of pitched in a little bit here and there, and as long as that information sharing is positive, you can have a very positive experience. But and then the key component, and Jeet kind of mentioned there about faculty and academic departments specifically, a lack of control from an academic department is always a big concern, and the admissions side, and making sure quality, making sure that students are going to be successful, that typically is the big red flag for a centralized operation, because of those kinds of things, and people losing control and feeling left out of the loop. Next one, we will kind of talk about decentralized sort of offices. So kind of the opposite of centralized, but touching on a few of those points. Obviously, a decentralized sort of organization, academic departments especially find that very comforting. There's a lot more control from their side. They get to see the admissions, they get to see the students, they get to meet with the students, they get more understanding about those students as they're coming in, but also what the offices are doing to bring those students in, which a lot of, in a centralized operation, they're kind of left out in the dark a little bit on some of those things. Departmental or process experts. So kind of what I mentioned before, we didn't have experts in, say, the MBA or the business school, and what, full encompassing of that business school. We had a lot of generalists, and that's how we sort of operate in a centralized environment. Whereas a decentralized, you have someone very specific who knows everything about that one operation. The hard part is, you end up having a silo effect. So everyone wants to do just what they need to do in their office. And from my perspective, at least, it doesn't always push the institution forward as one. You have several offices that might be amazing at what they do, and several offices that need a lot of assistance and some upgrading in some certain areas. But and that kind of touches on that last point there. From the outside looking in, especially, an institution can appear very fragmented, and leaving organizations like myself wondering, do you want international students, or is it just the business school that wants international students and knows how to work with those students? So as long as that decentralized process has a lot of communication, because communication is typically where everything breaks down, and everyone is on the same page and pulling together in the same direction, you can avoid some of that fragmentation. So the next slide will kind of very quickly touch on the institutional impact. So I kind of mentioned some of this already, but decentralization is typically a preference from the departments, especially academic departments. No one wants to lose control of their baby or what they're doing or their specialized area, and that's completely understandable. But centralization can also be seen as very scary. So I've gone through a full complete change, and I know the title of this presentation was about change, and change typically, from what I've seen, is moving from things like decentralization to centralization or vice versa. And it's very scary in general change, but moving from decentralized to centralized can be extremely scary, especially for departments around. Enrollment goals, my experience, it's centralized structures allow more breadth of enrollment, but then in a decentralized process, you have those different individual departments that are feeling left out, and they're not feeling the love as far as getting all of the support from the admissions or marketing or recruitment or the ISSO staff or whatever it might be. And so from a decentralized process with people in those departments doing those things, they feel more control and feel more part of that process. And really now touching on like the administrative staff, the SIOs, I have experienced at least, there's a more of a thriving in a centralized model. They feel more ownership, but there's a lot more pressure put on those people as well. And, you know, coming from a senior level position at an institution, you know, on my plate, I had to know everything and I had to answer all questions at all times. And that can be very difficult to do at times. So it does put a little bit more pressure, but also at the same time, you know, we were able to thrive from my marketing, recruitment, and admissions departments and really get those enrollments to heights that the institutions had never seen. So now talking a little bit about from the outside looking in. So externally, we talk about agents, international institution vendors, you know, the various, you know, vendors that institutions might be working with. And there's no doubt, at least in my mind, a preferred organizational structure is a centralized structure because it's having one point of contact. And, you know, having a one point of contact in an institution from the outside looking in, especially for international organizations that are based in China or India or wherever they might be, being able to go to one person and say, I have a question about my student who does have a mental health issue, or my student who needs to get admissions, or whatever it might be, makes it quite easy for that person to connect with the institution and feel part of the institution and really create a bond and a relationship. And that is what a lot of external vendors are looking for. And I know, you know, George is one of those as well. And we really want to create a relationship with the institution, not simply about enrollments, but about a partnership and about taking care of our students while they're there. So having that sort of one office or one organization we can be in touch with really helps us on that. It's very difficult to build relationships across campus when you're not there all the time. So you know, having that one person also allows us to build that one relationship rather than trying to build 20 different relationships as well. Not saying it's the way to go, but you know, from an experience on the outside looking in now over the last 12 months, you know, that's been one of the challenges that I've faced as well. I think that's all on me. I didn't do a whole lot of my introduction or who I am, but happy to answer those questions by email or anything as well. So don't want to hold up anymore and get those questions answered that we might have.
Thank you so very much, Jerry. This, I mean, again, that practitioner perspective is invaluable. And again, we're looking at different experiences folks have had as their careers have evolved. Before we jump into the Q&A, I want to highlight two things. For our visitors today, or participants, please visit the Gateway website. There's an opportunity for you to have a free 30-minute assessment with a career coach. So if you visit the website, you can look for Sarah Spencer's information. She is one of our sponsors of the Gateway Leadership Institute, so we certainly appreciate that. But again, the 30-minute assessment to understand your career objectives or to tackle one of those career challenges you have is available to everybody. Also, on November 18th, on Friday, we are going to be hosting a LinkedIn profile optimization webinar. You do need to register, but visit the Gateway website. You'll be able to find that without any difficulty. If you do have trouble, though, just send me or any of us a message on LinkedIn or email, and we'll point you to the registration page. It's free, but we do need to register so that we are able to keep track of those stats. Okay, let's jump in. I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague Rosa to help facilitate our Q&A.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions too. And I'm going to start with a question that's for all of our panelists today. And that's from Thomas Kelly. And he says, how important is change management experience in the field today? And what training would you recommend in this area? Is a short-term course effective?
So if I could jump in and just say this is very important for senior international officers and IE leaders, and so much so that actually one of AIA's key publications that has been around since the early 2000s and updated since then is called SIO as Change Agent. That was written by one of our past presidents, John Heil. And then the most recent edition is also with input from Fiona Hunter, who's a past president of the European Association of International Education. So it has a more global perspective. This is also a topic that is addressed in the week-long Leadership Academy of AIA, as well as to the various sessions at our conference. So absolutely an essential topic to be addressed for international education leaders.
And Darla, I just put the link to AIA on that page. You can see all of the different resources. I think it's 3 or 4 down, that particular book you were talking about.
Super, thanks so much.
So does any of our other panelists want to answer also this question?
Well, let me jump in. I would say that change management is something that every institution is going through, especially in the present context. There are so many things that are happening in our institutions, whether it is declining enrollment, and that has an element for international senior international officers to address from a international perspective. As to the training, Tom, I would say the short-term training, I think, is good for the overall staff, because it isn't just the leadership who needs to understand it. I think many of the staff members, would need to understand what that is and how they deal with it, and what your expectations, are, in that process. But I think for the leadership, a little bit more than the short-term training would be needed. Maybe even an institute of a couple of days is that I have found helpful. But it is an important topic, as we are really, when it comes to international, everything to everybody, at least, although we don't view it that way, I think, a lot of folks at our institutions kind of view it that way. And this topic would really address, some of the things that we're all going through.
And I'll just add to what both Darla and Jeet talked about. There's a continuum here, and the continuum starts with the individual. And if somebody is in a position as an international student advisor, or as a study abroad advisor, for instance, in our offices, there are courses, short courses that they can take that they give a more contextual view of what they're going through. Sort of what Jeet was talking about, that enrollment management may be shifting because of demographics, because of geopolitical issues, et cetera, and people can understand that. At the SIO level, Darla was talking, I think, pretty persuasively, that some of the AIA courses, the week-long seminars, can be extremely helpful. But then you can even go to the institutional level for change management. Jeet and I actually were just together at a peer review through the ACE Internationalization Laboratory. So if people are thinking on an institutional level, there's also change management that goes on for international higher education offices that that can be not only helpful, can be crucial, given where the world is going and the kinds of issues that we're all dealing with. So there are a variety of resources that I think can be drawn on.
Thank you all. And let me just put the last question because of time. We have one from Jorge Enrique Troncoso, and he says, what do you think we need to see more in graduate degree programs to prepare students to be more international prep as international scholars or administrators?
Since I didn't talk on the last one, I'll just throw in, and I went from a graduate background. I do think, one of the things that we were trying to institute were some short courses on campus about American life, living in the US, understanding academics in the US. A lot of these students are coming from academic backgrounds that are very different than what they're experiencing upon arrival. And in that first semester, what we we were always trying to do at my previous institution was really try and prepare those students better success for better career success in the US or back home. But a lot of our students were looking to stay in the US to work and do their OPT and those kinds of things. But preparing them to be able to sort of cope with what the culture shock more so than anything. And that's when you see a lot of these types of pathway providers and everything. And what one of their big points that they are selling is that they're doing all this prep work, and it's something that institutions I felt very strongly about over the last few institutions I worked for, that if we can incorporate that into our programming, especially early, we can provide them a more successful path, whether it be onto a career or onto further study in PhDs or different doctorate type programs as well. So that's something that I would, if you have an English language department on campus, that's something that we tapped into. We were able to kind of work together and collaborate a little bit more on some of those, those ideas and items. I had a pathway background, so I was able to bring that kind of knowledge in, but it's something that, I think a lot of us should be thinking about on that graduate side.
And let me just add, I'm just coming from a conference that was looking at intercultural competence and the future of work and how important intercultural skills are to all who are graduating. If they're going to be working with people, they're going to need intercultural competence. So just wanted to mention that as well. And it's important to include in the graduate programs too.
And I would just jump in, just a quick comment about the graduate programs is, certainly depending on, different universities, some are very focused on research, very theoretical, so more academic type, so to speak, but others are a little bit more practitioner oriented. The graduate program that I went to at UMass Amherst, although in the books it's called the comparative higher education, it really is the international development education. That's the focus. Really it was looking at the development aspect of international education in many different countries, such as the education systems, how the literacy, programs are designed, how, the government policies are developed. So it was much more focused on that. So that, I thought prepared me more towards the administrative, jobs. And I think, although again, that would be under the purview of the academic department, but there is a mix, out there.
Okay, well, thank you, our panelists, so much for a very insightful discussion. We always want to honor everybody's time, so our hour is up, but thank you to our sponsors and participating organizations and all our panelists, as well as everybody who participated today. If you saw in the chat, we are doing a survey regarding careers in international higher education. Please, it'll take you just a few minutes. I'll also post that on LinkedIn, so you'll be able to find that link elsewhere. But thank you so much to everybody, and of course to Gateway for creating the platform to make this happen. Thank you, Rosa and Jiming, and again to all of our panelists. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.